Hopefully we don't run out of batteries. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to get started. Hi, remote sites. Hi, Tammy, Serena, Janelle, and all our online participants. Thank you for coming. I'm Barbara DeGraff. For those of you who don't know me, I am your learning community facilitator. I am going to work very hard to keep my hands from moving. It's not easy, given my background. I usually talk with them. So if I seem a little stiff, that is why. But I want our online folks and our remote sites to be able to hear us well. Remote sites, we are down to one microphone. So if you have a problem and you can't hear me, please use the chat box and Carrie will chat back to you, our wonderful support staff. Speaking of our wonderful support staff, Carrie Collins and Shane Meserve, yay, who do all our technical work and put up with me. And I dearly appreciate that. All right, so we're going to get started, hopefully. Oh, I didn't point it at you, Carrie. There we go. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about promoting resilience. This is the third in our resilience series for this year, this fiscal year, and we're going to hopefully focus on behavioral health systems. So that's our goal, is to focus on behavioral health systems and how we can achieve good outcomes for our children, families, and always we think about ourselves as well, right? When we think about resilience, because it's important that we build resilience. And I also am focusing on rural communities, given that we are a rural community. There we go. Strategies, as many of you know, this is our mission. Our job is to try to promote, elevate the field, providing training, technical assistance. All of our events are free of charge, and we really appreciate you coming and supporting us at the learning communities, trainings, etc. Speaking of trainings, I just want to make a couple of notes of some new things that we're using. I think I have one more. Yay. Okay. So you all know about our trainings. How many of you have gone to a strategies training, not a learning community, but a training? Okay, pretty good. Yeah, okay, excellent. So our trainings are all free of charge. We also have webinars that are about usually, an hour and a half in length. And then, of course, our learning communities. And you folks are welcome to participate in any learning community throughout the state of California. You're in the Sierra region, but you can participate as an online person for any of the learning communities. And the other question I wanted to ask you is, I think it was probably about 4 months ago that we developed the resource page, Building Community Resilience, Volume 1, and we were wondering if anybody has accessed that resource. If you have accessed that resource, put your hand up. Okay, don't be shy. Okay, nobody. Okay, we're trying to get a feel for the utilization of our website as well as this new resource, because there's supposed to be a series, correct, Carrie? There, right, exactly. So this is something that we talked about last time. Potentially, if you have a chance to go on our Strategies 2.0 webpage and take a look at this resource, we could organize some learning communities around these toolkits, that's what we call them, around this toolkit. So it's something to think about, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The other thing I wanted to mention is all of our learning communities are recorded, and our webinars are recorded as well. We do not record our trainings, but we have a YouTube page, and it's the strategy. If you go to YouTube, if you're a YouTube user, if you go to YouTube and you search Strategies 2.0, we have all of our learning communities from throughout the state of California are on there. You can watch them at your leisure. All our webinars are available. And it's really great if you want to do trainings for your staff or just for yourself. But our last learning community, we talked a lot about utilizing Child Abuse Prevention Month, which is coming up in April, as a way to build family, community, and agency resilience. And we had a lot of really good resources, and that's on there. So if you're ever interested, please use it. It's a great, great resource. Anything, Carrie or Shane, you want to add? Oh, you have to come up here, man. Oh, well, we also have we have some of our Vehicles for Change monographs. You're pointing, are they? Why don't you come up here? And for those of you that are off, that are not here, Judy Sherman is here, and Judy Sherman was the lead author for the Vehicles for Change monograph. And we utilize this in our trainings, as well as one of the things, there are 3 webinars, a series of webinars on utilizing Vehicles for Change to try to elevate your Family Resource Center. The next one is February 15th. So make sure you're signed up for all our resources at Strategies on our resource page so that you're getting the emails. How many of you are getting emails from Strategies? Okay, if you're not, do go to our Strategies 2.0 website and make sure you sign up to be on our mailing list. And you can check, my recommendation is check all the different regions for learning communities. That's where you can see some of the other events that are coming up. But then you'll get our all of our emails with information. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Thanks to our funder, the reason we can provide all this for free is we are funded by the California Office of Child Abuse Prevention. Yay! Hand for them. Yay! If you use social media, I do not, but if you do, it's another way to promote our events, and you can use the hashtag Sierra Learning Community, hashtag Building Resilience Series, hashtag Strategies 2.0, and then you can tell all your friends about these wonderful events and hopefully get folks here. The more, the better. Learning community is just one of the things that I wanted to share with you. For those of you that are new, for those of you that have been here before, forgive me for repeating, but our learning communities, we really try to have a cross-sector partnership. And the idea behind the learning community versus a training is, while we have wonderful subject matter experts that are going to talk to you today, we also always provide you with an opportunity to network with your peers. And so we have a half an hour before we start for networking, and then I try to have at least a half an hour, if not more, for networking at the end of the learning community, so that you can move away learning things from your peers, sharing the wisdom in the room, and then taking things into your next, taking things home to your work. And this is your learning community. So Building Resilience series we selected because that's what you folks wanted. We're coming up on a new fiscal year. In your packet is a save the date for the May 16th learning community. I already have my speakers lined up. However, I do have room for more people, and you're going to learn about a resource after Oscar and Lori do their presentations, Rural Information Hub, which has a whole list of great evidence-based resources in the behavioral health field. If you, I'm going to task you with as your assignment, if you go on that Rural Information Hub after you've learned about it today and taken a tour, and you come up with a program you'd like me to try to bring to the May learning community, let me know, because I definitely have room in my lineup. And also, in May, we'll spend some time thinking about what we want to do for our next year. And again, for the remote sites, for the folks that are online, share with me your ideas. If you have a speaker, somebody that you'd like to hear, you come upon somebody on the internet, reach out to me. This is your learning community, and we want to make it relevant for you. And hopefully we have another, at least 1, 2, 3 years of a contract that we're able to do this, so we can really build on what we're working on, and that's our goal. And these were the goals for this fiscal year. We wanted to develop a common understanding of successful approaches to build family, agency, and community resilience. And then we wanted to establish a knowledge base of evidence-based tools and interventions. And again, the Rural Information Hub, which you'll get just a little taste of today, that's a wonderful resource for evidence-based interventions. And then if there's anyone you want to hear from, please let me know. We try to start and end on time. We want you to participate as much as possible. Today will be a little bit challenging. We only have the one microphone, which is how our online and our remote sites hear us. So if you have a question, raise your hand. All we're going to do is repeat the question back so that the online and the remote folks can hear you. Otherwise, if you just speak to me, only us in the room can hear. We'd like you to limit your sidebar conversations. Silence your cell phones, but keep them, on. We understand you have families and you have needs. Keep them on vibrate if you need to. And then practice self-care. I haven't built in an actual time for you to break, but please feel free to get up, use the restroom. Preschool's not in session, so we only have one man. Sorry, but when the preschool's in session, for those of you that are new, everybody has to use the men's restroom, but we can use the female restroom, and so we have very easy today. And please help yourself to treats, coffee, tea, etc. And I know our online people will be practicing self-care. Today, these are our goals our objectives for today. So we're going to develop a vision for a trauma-informed system that promotes positive behavioral health outcomes that are accessible and responsive to rural communities. And Lori's going to speak to us first about that. We're going to think about what resources we already have and what we want to build so that we can realize this vision. We're going to develop an understanding of the importance of a culturally competent system that honors intergenerational trauma and identifies non-traditional champions and partners. And Oscar's going to focus a lot on that for us. And then we'll work together to identify some concrete actions. When Oscar's done with his presentation, we will have a remote presentation from Matt Bruflot from North Dakota Rural Information Hub. And he's going to take us on a quick tour. So that will hopefully... And today, we've already registered, and we're going to start learning in a minute. But first, these are our participants today. We have the hub in Jackson. Yay, shout out. We have a remote site in Loyalton. Yay, hi, Tammy. We have a remote site in Markleyville. Hi, Janelle. We have a remote site in Bishop. Serena, our newest remote site hostess. Woo! And we have a lot of online participants. About how many do we have today? About 18. So that's great. That's really good. And our online participants, hi. We know that you're probably multitasking, but we understand. We all do it. All right. We used to sit together, and I would go through everybody, and they would introduce themselves. I'm trying to cut back on my introduction segment. So what I'd like to do is a little speed dating. Okay. Has anybody done speed dating? Who hasn't done it? Who has not speed dated in a professional setting, not as a dating person? So what we're going to do is you're going to find someone you don't know. And if you can't find someone you don't know, find someone you don't know that well. And you're going to ask them the question, why do you do what you do? Okay. And we're going to have 3 minutes for this. Our online people, what I'd like you to do is, if you want to chat into the chat box, why do you do what you do? Chat it in, and for our folks remotely, just do it among yourselves. Why do you do what you do? 3 minutes. Find somebody you don't know or you kind of wish you knew a little more about. Okay, let's come back together. Let's come back together. All right, everybody, let's come back together. Does anybody in the hub here, did anybody learn something that they really want to share? Something that was, wow, that was so interesting. I learned about one of my peers. Anybody? Oh, here we go. I'll repeat what you say. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Excellent. So two things was somebody came from El Dorado County, me too. I'm from South Lake Tahoe. Woohoo! And you both have a passion for early childhood education. Did you both work in San Diego or no? But you come from Hunting, so they had a San Diego connection. Cool. Anybody from online? Hold on, I'm going to run over with the mic.
Yes, so we had Skylar Bright, who says that she loves to see people light up when they learn how simple it can be to feel better, which is awesome. I love that. And then we have Rose Colon, who said to be of service, to engage with people, to support and highlight their strengths, and to have an active part in enabling people to feel and be empowered.
Anybody from the remote site want to share anything? Uh-oh. I've got to get I have to get carryover. I just laid that one on you. Anybody from remote site, put up your hand if you want to share anything. And no? Okay. All right. That's cool. You don't have to share if you don't want to. Another time. Okay. I'm doing much better. I'm trying to keep my introduction short. So last but not least, I forgot to mention in your packets, you have an evaluation. Please, please, please fill it out. If you're here in the hub, leave it on the table. Especially if you have to leave early, just leave it on the registration table. If you're online, when you close out, the online participants, it'll pop up, and please fill it out because we want to make the online experience as good as we can for folks, and we can only do that if we hear back from you. And for the remote sites, my hostesses with the mostest should have copies of the evaluation for you. Please give it to your remote site host. And I just want to also mention in your packets, you have a printout that talks about where is your focus and the 4 practice methods. And this comes directly from the Vehicles for Change, which we have about 10 copies here in the hub, and they're also available online if you want copies. Again, whenever we do our work, what we try to think about is to frame our practice area, because the area that we focus in on will really impact the kind of changes that we want to make in our practice. So just think about your own work. These are the 4 practice methods. There's well-being services to support individuals and families. For many of us, that's like one-on-one work. I'm a CASA volunteer, so that's my work with my CASA youth. Growth and development activities to enrich lives. That's what we do here, our training, and I'm sure you do a lot of training in your work, and also just when you're educating the folks that you work with, the families and individuals, educating and empowering them. Civic engagement, which is when we get a little bit bigger and we go outside, maybe look at our agency itself, or we look at our agencies as a collaboration, and we try to really bring our issues to the fore. And then community building, where we try to look at what are the resources that we need and how can we leverage them. And I just want to say that one of the areas that other learning communities have focused in on is this leveraging resources, using data and things like that to try to bring the issues to the fore. So think about your work as you hear from Lori and then Oscar and then you hear from Matt, and think about where your work fits in. You usually work across multiple practice areas. With that, we're going to move on to our first speaker, Lori Chelius, who is from Origins Training, and she is going to take the mic, and you're going to have that. Yay, Laura!
So I'm also from New Jersey, so I have to keep my hands, the waving, so I will try to do my best there. So I love the speed dating, and it actually segues perfectly into some of the things I hope to talk about. Oh, right at Carrie, yeah, I met the wrong person. So just to share a little bit about why I do what I do. Okay. Coming from New Jersey, patience is also not my best quality. So there you go. So I shared with the two people I was chatting with that I have a healthcare background, and I was doing a lot of, before I was doing training specifically focused on trauma-informed and resilience building practices, I worked in healthcare. And I have a public health background. And one of the things I was getting really frustrated with is that when we were talking about prevention, we were often talking about things like smoking cessation, and which is important, and cholesterol screenings, but we really weren't getting into some of these really tough upstream root cause issues that talked a lot about why people are getting sick in the first place. So that was my segue in to the work that I'm doing now. And we do Origins, I started with one other person, and we do training specifically focused on trauma-informed and resilience building practices. And one of the things that we also noticed is that all these different organizations were doing this great work, and many of them had been doing it for decades. This is not necessarily a new body of evidence. The ACE study gives a common language and framework, but the ACE framework does give us that common language. So when we talk about school-based mental health, we're talking about different issues in different organizations. We're all sort of talking about the same thing, but getting some common language so we all know we're talking about the same thing. So that's a little bit about my why I do it, what I do. So 3 things I'm hoping to do in the next 45 minutes with you guys. Talk about 3 things. So first, what is a trauma-informed and resilience building approach? This might be a little bit repetitive to things you all have seen before, but I just thought it would be useful to start with a common definition that we all can move forward from. The second thing is, how do I build the foundation for taking that approach and integrating it into my organization or community? And then the third thing is, how do I get started? Because that's one of the things we hear most from people. It's like, how do I get started in actually implementing some aspects of this approach? All right, so just the slowed animation might lose a little bit of the effect. There we go. But does anyone feel like this with some of this stuff? I mean, trauma-informed is such a buzzword right now. When we talk about resilience building approaches and a healing culture and trauma responsive and ACEs and what does this all mean? And I mean, I feel like sometimes, just what do I do with all this information? We're at this stage where we have this wonderful, wonderful information that's coming out, but how do I integrate it and distill it and think about how I can move forward in either my organization or my community? Keep forgetting I have to point at Carrie. Okay, so what is a trauma-informed approach? So this, thank you. Patience. We should have started with mindfulness. So I took this definition from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Organization. It's a very common definition. It's certainly not the only one, but I think a lot of people look to this as the standard definition on a trauma-informed approach. And it really, at its essence, it's really understands the impact of trauma on other people and integrates that approach into how the organization or community practices, into procedures and practices and cultural norms within the organization. And the thing I always like to highlight here is that second part about, it's not just, yes, it is the symptoms of trauma in the clients we all serve, but it's also in the staff, it's also in ourselves, because we can't create a trauma-informed organization for other people without looking at our own internal selves first and our own internal organizations. And then SAMHSA talks about 6 specific principles to support that approach. So safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural and awareness of cultural, historical, and gender issues. So again, these principles are really setting a foundation and help build a culture that can implement that approach. And I know Oscar is going to talk a lot more specifically about that 6th value in his talk later on. All right. So the other definition I just wanted to share a little bit is, what are we talking about with behavioral health? I took this definition from the California Children's Trust, which was a statewide agency that was established last year, really designed specifically to focus on child well-being through policy and systems reform. And if you look at this definition, again, the context here is children, but I think we can expand this more generally. Clinical and non-clinical interventions that support children's social, emotional, mental, developmental, and cognitive health and prevent and treat substance use disorders. Can anyone think of anything that doesn't fall into this system? So when we talk about, I just want to sort of say from the outset, when I'm thinking about behavioral health, yes, there is the traditional behavioral health system, and that's certainly an important part of what we're talking about here. But we're also talking about schools and child welfare and families and communities. So really redefining a little bit of what we're talking about here and understanding that they all interact with each other. So I'm not going to go into this in detail, because that's really not the point here. But also just we've talked about this common definitions and this common language and this common understanding. So when we begin to think about how do we integrate this approach, we always talk about with people about getting a solid foundation. And what do we think is the foundation? There might be other interpretations of this, but really having everyone understand the adverse childhood experience is really framework, not just the original study itself, but using that study as a framework to think through the link between adversity and health outcomes. And then second, an understanding of social and historical trauma. So the experiences of toxic stress and trauma are not just those 10 things from the original ACE study, but a much broader set of experiences: community violence, racism, food insecurity, and historical traumas, Native American genocide, American slavery. So all of these really impact our communities and our families. And then third, really an understanding of stress, what stress is, the different types of stress, and how that impacts our brains and bodies. And not doing that as a way really to nerd out on the neuroscience or the biology, but really using that understanding of how stress impacts us as a foundation for how we can build and sustain resilience in ourselves and in our communities. So whenever we work with people, it's sort of let's get on the same page of this information. And whether if it's an organization, not just the leadership and the board, and not just people doing direct services, but everyone. We have trained sort of security firms where the security officers integrating sort of understanding this approach, this information. So that's sort of step one. And again, I know that's not the point of today, but just really having everyone have that common understanding. So the next question is, okay, so we have this understanding, and the biggest question we often get is, okay, I get all of that. I know I'm sort of stuck in this sea of information about ACEs, and I don't know what to do with all of it. So before we even get into talking about implementation and different activities, really talking about how do we build the foundation, because the foundation is really what's going to sustain us, right? So I want to talk about two things, talking about a vision and talking about the culture that's going to support that vision. So Barbara's exercise of going around into why do you do what you do was a perfect segue. We didn't even coordinate this, but if we look at a vision, what is a vision? We can define a vision as sort of an aspirational statement for an organization or community that really put some guide for what we're going to be doing in the medium to long term. So then we can sort of fill in our activities within that broader vision. And as we articulate a vision for our organization, for our community, so the why you do what you do becomes just so important. Because if you think about why you're doing what you're doing, that just brings so much more meaning and impact to your vision. I'll come back to that in a second. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Here we go. So as we think about vision, this is a picture of my 12-year-old son. He's in the 6th grade, and he had a class project this year where he had to introduce himself to his class. And he had the idea of sharing all the different hats he wears. And so he introduced himself at the beginning of the year, and he talked about how he's a son and a brother and also a friend. And he also plays soccer, and he also does theater, and he loves music. And so that's what he brought in on his poster. And I thought it was a great metaphor to really think through all the different hats we all wear. So yes, we come to work in our particular agency or organization, but as one of my colleagues like to say, we all come to work with a story, right? We can't have all these artificial barriers between who we are as an individual and then who we come to work with. So as we think about creating this vision, just being really conscious of the different roles we all play and then also how we interact with each other. So I do trainings, but I'm also a parent. I'm also a youth soccer coach. I'm also a partner. And just really understanding that we all wear many hats. And as we think about how to choose our vision, we want to be conscious of the setting we're applying this to and also how those settings interact with each other. So you might come in sort of saying, I'm going to focus on this agency and bringing in a resilience building approach into my agency. But we know from our definition of behavioral health, I mean, there's all sorts of ways we interact. Maybe you want to focus on your family, your individual role as a family. I think of youth soccer, I think that's a part of the behavioral health system. That probably wouldn't, no one's traditional definition would probably include that. But thank you for the reminder. But I really view, I'm working with kids on a soccer field. To me, that's part of behavioral health. And again, just thinking about how those systems interact with each other. Some of these barriers we talk about, they're really not always real distinctions. One of my favorite examples of this is, I mentioned I train with somebody, my training partner. One of the other hats she wears is she is a group facilitator for parents who've been removed from or they've been interacting with child welfare. And she facilitates a parent group on the impacts of trauma. So in that role, she's wearing the hat of both sort of the guide and the facilitator to the parents. And then she's also representing the system that's threatening or has taken away their children. So just understanding how those different roles interact with each other can really impact how we think about building connections and trust and some of the barriers that might exist to that. I think I might one too many. And all of this, I mean, yay, Surgeon General of California, 3 cheers for that. I mean, this is just so exciting, right? So, I mean, but, you know, I think why I love this quote is really talking about this isn't just those people, this is all of us. This impacts all of us into varying degrees, in different contexts. But as we think about integrating this approach, we have to keep ourselves front and center as we think about how to implement it. So with all of that context, let's actually talk about the vision. So we talked about what the vision is, that statement, that aspirational statement that really sets some guideposts for what we're going to do as an organization. And how when we bring that why into that vision, how much more impactful it would be. So apparently videos don't work very well with GoToMeeting. There's a great video for this from Michael Jr. If anyone has seen this, it's fantastic. I really encourage you. I think Barbara's going to send it out after to really illustrate this point. So I'll just grab a quote from it. When he talks about when you know the why behind what you're doing, just the what you're doing just has so much more impact and meaning. So we think about the vision of I want to integrate trauma-informed practices into my organization. That's great, but why? Why are you doing it? Because I want to build healthy families and help children thrive. That impact, that why, the purpose we all bring to the work we do, just brings that guidepost that we're setting so much more meaning. So again, before we even get to implementation, so my background is in strategic planning. So that's sort of what I did before I did training. And you can do all the strategic plans you want. You can have a great plan, you can have great goals, a whole implementation plan. And if you don't have a culture that's going to support it, you're not going to get anywhere. So as we talk about the foundation, I just want to talk about a few things that I think are important in a trauma-informed culture. And this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. The whole idea of culture is a much broader topic, and it requires, you know, a much more in-depth. And I know Oscar is going to talk a lot more about cultural inclusivity as part of this, but I just wanted to touch on a few values that I think are really important as part of resilience building culture. Because again, what we're doing here is we're setting the table, right? We're setting the table for everything we're going to do. So when we look at culture, right, what is culture? Well, it's a set of values, it's attitudes of belief. And the important thing is you're going to have a culture in your organization, whether you're intentional about it or not. It will happen. So taking the time to be intentional and really define what those values are for your organization can, again, set that table from then which you can operate. So I want to talk about 4 specific values. 1, the power of relationships. So did anyone see the Oprah segment on 60 Minutes last spring? So Oprah did a segment on 60 Minutes last spring, specifically talking about ACEs and the role of trauma-informed practices. And as part of this, she asked Bruce Perry, who was interviewed, she said, what's the difference between a child who has experienced trauma and was really impacted by that and one who thrives? And his answer, he just said relationships. That's the difference. And said another way, I think our buddy Mr. Rogers had it right. Love is at the root of everything. I know, he was the sweat. You just have to get the sweater in. So just to give an example of how solidifying the fact that the power of relationships is important, the power of relationships being a value, how that might implement what you do. Let's look at conflict, right? Every organization, has anybody work in an organization or live in a community, be a part of a family that doesn't have conflict, right? We all have it, it's part of life. So how are we gonna deal with conflict? How are we gonna address conflict resolution? Well, if we fundamentally believe in the importance of relationships, the power of connection and repairing them when they're disrupted, that affects our policies and procedures around conflict resolution. So if we believe in relationships as a really important thing, we might implement restorative practices instead of more punitive measures. So again, that value that's defining the culture will affect the solutions you come up with. So the second thing is that behavior is adaptive, right? Can anyone recognize themselves in this photo? I definitely, when I'm on a busy road, again, showing my Jersey roots, in traffic, my shark fin is out. We all adapt to our environments, right? Based on our experiences, based on past experience, current experiences. And so if we can view behavior in that adaptive way, it really gives us a big reframe of thinking about how we work with people and interact with people. So Vincent Felitti, one of the authors of the original ACE study, really talks about how the study offers us a way to think about what we traditionally view as public health problems are really personal, can be viewed as personal solutions, right? So that's a completely different reframe to thinking about traditional approaches to public health problems. And to give an example of that, let's go back to the example of smoking. So if smoking provides a solution to someone, it could be reducing anxiety, it could be connecting with a group, it could be comfort when alone. So if that smoking is providing a solution, how effective is it going to be to say, stop smoking, it's bad for you, stop smoking, it's bad for you? So again, that value and that understanding could impact how we think about the interventions and how they might work. Okay, so value number 3. So we've talked about relationships, we've talked about behavior as adaptive. And 3, the people who face the problems every day are the ones who hold the key to their answer. So this is a fundamental tenet of a human-centered design approach. And to illustrate a little bit more of what this means, I'm going to share an example of a friend and colleague from Kansas, Rebecca. And she does a lot of work with families and communities about bringing in trauma responsive practices and building resilience, specifically to address intergenerational poverty. And she talked about her own journey and how she had experienced intergenerational poverty and how what really changed it for her, it was in the organization that was working with people, like who was working with her, trying to get people out of poverty, came to her and said, let's get you at the table. Okay, and we want to hear your voice. We don't know how you're going to get out of poverty, but you do. And we're going to be with you until you figure it out. And that's just a fundamentally different way of approaching problem solving, that voice. And now she's off doing trainings and working with communities. It's really an amazing story. So some people call this like a power with approach. Yeah, I've just sort of, some people call this a power with approach. And some people sort of resist this a little bit, particularly when it comes to working with kids. Well, if we give power with to kids, they're going to be running the show, right? And I just want to share an example from my own experience that hopefully illustrate the difference between power with and power sharing. So I mentioned I coach youth soccer. And one of the things that I really, really believe as a coach is that part of my role is to help empower the kids to make their own decisions on the field with themselves by interacting with their teammates, instead of always looking to the parents on the sideline to sort of say, what do I do? And as part of that, I really try to get their feedback on what they think is working well, what they think they need to work on, and some, what's working well in the field, and using their voice as a source of input. Not always thinking I know best. But I realized recently, I'm starting a new season with my 9-year-old, so a 9-year-old daughter. So you saw my 12-year-old son, this is my 9-year-old daughter, and her team. I'm coaching them for the next 6 months. And we chose a team that's really, really, they're not wallflowers, I'll just say that. And I love that, like that's part of the reason they chose them. But we went to the first game and I gave them the lineup, and I had 10 little 9-year-olds going, I want to play striker, I want to play striker. And what I realized is I had lapsed into a little bit of power sharing. So in an attempt to power with them and get their input, they would cross the line into thinking they were in charge. I still get to own the lineup, I'm still the coach, I want their input, but we can still sort of be sort of an authority figure at the same time as we're integrating the voice with people we're working with. And the fourth thing I want to touch upon is the power of a growth mindset. This is based on Carol Dweck's work, who coined the term along with a fixed mindset. And the fundamental difference here is, instead of I can't do this, I can't do this yet. So, because I have 3 children, so I need to mention them all. This is a picture from my 7-year-old's first grade classroom. So one of the things in the culture of the school is they really talk about this growth mindset and the power of yet. So they made a picture of all the things that the kids in the classroom couldn't do yet, which I just thought was amazing. And I'll just share a few that I think are funny. A couple of them for my kids. So my daughter is allergic to peanuts, so she can't eat peanuts yet. For any American Ninja Warrior fans, she can't do the warped wall yet. My personal favorite, she can't fly yet. So she really believes in the power of the growth mindset. Another favorite in there is work with an octopus and touch an octopus. So I don't know where that came from, if they were the same kid, but it's just sort of amazing. And part of the growth mindset is this idea that mistakes are part of learning and growing, right? And we can think about this in relation to kids, but we know from the brain science and neuroplasticity, even as adults, we're still carving new neural pathways, right? So those are a picture of erasers. Her teacher gave every kid in the classroom for the holidays an eraser. And with it, she had a little note that says, I'm giving you an eraser because I want you to make mistakes, because that's how you learn and that's how you grow. And I just thought that was amazing. I was very grateful to have these teachers. And as we think about this, if we think about integrating a trauma-informed approach, there's no blueprint for this. We're all learning as we go. And we're going to make mistakes, right? And that's where innovation happens. So if you look at some of the Silicon Valley companies that really focus on innovation, they really talk about how do we create a culture that tolerates risk. Mark Zuckerberg might not be the best example to use right now because I see a bit of hot water, but Ian talks about the biggest risk is not taking one, right? So as we do these things, as we implement a trauma-informed and resilience-building approach, how do we get a culture that's going to sort of say, let's take some risks, let's try some new things, because this is about innovation. This work is very much about innovation. Sorry, I can't quite get used to this timing. Okay. Okay. So we have our foundation, right? We have our vision, and we've got a culture that's going to support that vision. And again, it's not that these are the four exact right values. It's about going through a process with your organization that really intentionally articulates what your values are, because that's going to affect how you approach your implementation. So how do we approach our implementation? Well, defining this really simply, let's take this apart into two steps: defining our need and then meeting our needs. So let's talk about each. So I know your last speaker was from Trauma Transformed, and talked a lot about trauma-informed agency assessments. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. They do have a great resource on their website that has a lot of these assessment tools. And the point is, you can use those tools to really do a systematic assessment of your organization and see where some of your gaps were, see where you're doing well. It's not forget, like, just articulating what you're doing well. That's a lot of things we're already doing well. We've just never thought of them as explicitly trauma-informed practices. So looking at your organization from the perspective of different domains. So looking at leadership and staff. Is your board on board with the trauma-informed approach? How are staff supervised? Are they experiencing burnout? Clients and consumers, do they feel safe in your facility? Are their basic needs being met? So if they're experiencing food insecurity, and we're talking about a number of other programs, how is that going to work? Services, are they inclusive? Are they culturally competent? Are the voices of the consumers being integrated into the services that are being offered? Again, these are just sample questions to be asking. Policies and procedures. How do we hire people? How do we fire people? How do we manage conflict? Physical environment. Do people feel physically safe at your facility? Are the bathrooms lit? So again, all of these things are just questions to be asking about, and you can think about as your values that you've articulated, how that's going to impact how you think about solving some of the things you've identified in that process. So once we've done the assessment, how do we actually translate those into specific, concrete goals? And this is just my personal opinion. I think this is one area, not the only area, but one area sometimes we get tripped up with in terms of implementing a trauma-informed approach. Because a trauma-informed approach, so that families can thrive, is a great, awesome vision. But it's hard to know how to implement that. And so to implement that, we need some specific goals. So think about New Year's resolutions, right? If we sort of go into 2019 saying, I want to be healthier, that's great, but what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about sleeping more? Drinking less alcohol, connecting with friends more? There's so many different ways to interpret that. So the idea here is to be as specific as possible. So just, there's a little jargony, so I apologize from this. I also have a business background, so excuse the jargon detour for just a minute, but we do want them to be specific. You just talked about that. Measurable. I like to think of this too, reframing this a little bit different, because measurement is really tricky in this area. We're not not talking about widgets, right? But how are you going to know you're successful? I think it's important to have some sort of feedback loop to know what you're doing is working. Assignable. So who's on your team? We all know we can't do this alone. And we also need to hold each other accountable for what we say we're going to do to implement this. So really getting specific about who's on your team and who's doing what. Realistic. We can have some grand plans. We could go through the assessment, realize our physical environment is completely not conducive to the approach we're aiming for. But if we don't have a budget to really transform our physical environment and our facilities overall, we might be limited in terms of what we can do there. So just being realistic. And finally, putting some time constraints on this. So if we want to train all of our staff on ACEs, when are we going to do that? All right, so once we have those goals, let's look at them in terms of some of the strengths that are going to help us achieve those goals, and then some of the barriers we might experience. So if we think about those goals, and maybe our goal is to train all of our staff on ACEs, well, if you've got a board on board, that's going to really help that approach. You might have some resistant staff, right? So that could be a challenge. How are you going to handle that? You might have a really strong community partners that you can collaborate with. That's really going to help facilitate this effort. You might have a really strong volunteer community that you can leverage. So again, thinking through these goals from the perspective of what's going to help, what resources do I have, both in my organization and my community to help achieve them, and what some of the challenges we're going to face when doing them, and how are we going to deal with those challenges? How are we going to prepare for them? And then finally, once we have some concrete goals identified, how are we going to implement them? So this comes down to a lot of brainstorming. And one of the things I just want to remind you to think about is who's at your table when you're brainstorming. Included a resource and what Barbara, I think, is going to in the packets on participatory brainstorming. But to illustrate this point, this really comes back to that human-centered design approach of power with. I just want to share a story from a training we did last year in Wisconsin, where someone shared a story of how they were working to collect food for people who were experiencing food insecurity. And they got all this great food, they had a big effort. And one of the clients said, this is all great, but we don't have facilities to cook them in. What we really need is a crock pot with that food. And how when you bring the voices of the people you're serving, it can really affect how meaningful the solutions are and impactful. So we talked about sort of just a really abbreviated process for thinking through some goals and how to implement them, talking about the vision and the culture as the foundation, defining some goals, implementing those goals. And just wanted to sort of end with a few examples of people who are doing this work. And part of the point here is going back to this, we all wear many hats. The settings we can apply them as, the foundational knowledge with ACEs is going to be the same, whether we're working in a family or community organization or healthcare or a school, but what it looks like in the implementation of it is going to be really different. And it can also reflect the different roles we all wear. And when we talk about leadership in this way, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the title, right? It can be a CEO, it can be an executive director, but these champions can be all over in our organizations, in our communities, in our families. I feel like I'm finally getting the timing down. There's like 3 slides left. So this first example is a friend and colleague of mine, Reagan Overholt. So she's a parent. She is a parent of 2 now adult children who she adopted out of foster care when they were younger and had experienced a lot of trauma. And her light bulb went off when she started working at First Five and really started to understand her kids' behavior through the lens of what they had experienced. And she talked about how important it was for her own self to learn tools with regulation and connection, because as she learned to regulate and connect herself, how much that impacted her kids. So again, this idea that it really does start with herself. So, how many people, anyone else do parent work with kids? The worst possible response, which I absolutely do sometimes when someone's having a tantrum, is to get out there and have an adult tantrum back, right? But who's had an adult tantrum? Definitely has. So this whole idea that it starts with us and we can impact these settings, I mean, talk about impact, direct impact into kids' lives. This particular example of how she'd applied it, she was working in first five, but this is her own individual family too. All right, the second example, so moving from more of the family and individual setting, moving up to an organizational setting. Tracy Falver is the executive director of Yolo County CASA. For anyone who's not familiar with CASA, court-appointed special advocate, sort of pairs a trained volunteer with a child in foster care. And she's been focused on implementing resilience building practices in her organization over the past several years. And there's a couple great examples, my favorite of the work she's done, but one of my favorites is she talked about how they, as an organization, they went through a process of really defining what their values were as an organization. And what they came up with had a lot on, integrity and compassion, but my favorite is badassery. And when she described this to me, she said, I realize this may not be a trauma-informed word, but the idea of advocacy without compromise, right? So I just love this as a value. So as you think about sort of, again, forming that foundation of values, that really impacts how you think about implementation. The other favorite thing I loved about what she did sort of an assessment of their organization, really focused on what are we already doing to build resilience. So one of the things they looked at was, our volunteers have always been really important. And before we knew about ACEs or any of that, that was important. But once they were explicit about that, they made it a much more explicit focus and really codified it into the culture. And their physical environment. And one of the things is she now brings her little dog JJ into work every day, and I mean, I guess if you're a cat lover, you might disagree, but a dog at work seems like a great thing to me to build resilience. So this example really is somebody who's working at a systems level. Taylor Nuval is living in DC. She's a friend and colleague who works specifically on criminal justice reform, looking at how to interrupt with the term she coined, which is the trauma to prison pipeline. And so she does a number of programs with women who are in jail, one of which is a journaling effort. She works with women who are incarcerated and do journaling to talk about, so they can share and have an outlet for the voice of their own experiences and how that's impacted their own experience of working with the criminal justice system. So again, these are really different examples, right? Same knowledge, same foundation, and then the implementation looks really different. And then finally, an example from Washington State, the self-healing communities model. In the 1990s, Washington State sort of did a collective effort to really try to address and build community resilience in a number of counties in Washington State. And you can read more about this, but one example I want to highlight is they went in with the principle is that we want to include the voice of the community and how we're thinking about this. And one particular story I just wanted to share is there was one town that had a very high emergency response call rate. They had the highest rate. And so they went in with the assumption of why that was. They looked and the community was dark. And the assumption was, well, it's dark because people want to have it dark so they can cover up criminal activity. But when they really got in and talked to the community, it's, well, people couldn't afford to replace the light bulbs. So again, how we think about and the assumptions we make, and when we include a broader set of people at the table and the discussion, can really impact how we think about the solutions. They have one of the most studied approaches to some of the evidence is, on some of these approaches is, this is one example of where we have some evidence of what's happened. What they've achieved is really remarkable. This is for one specific county over that time. But if you look at suicide rates, violent crime rates decreases, high school dropout decreases, they're really remarkable. Yeah. And Barbara, I didn't actually put this on the additional resources, but I can send it to you, the full report. I think it's a really good one. So just before ending, I just sort of wanted to come back to sort of this whole idea of the why and really where we started, where if we can always come back to the why we're doing what we do and keep that at the front and center, this sort of stuff, I like to say it's not, it's easy. it's not hard. So the concepts are hard, but it's not easy, right? It really does come back to that vision, that why, and why we all sort of do the work that we do. So with that, I am happy to take any questions or hand over to Oscar.
Any questions? Any questions from anybody? Remote sites? Anybody online? Anybody here? I wanted to say two things. I think I must have missed the additional resources. You must probably emailed it to me and I missed it. So the resource that Lori mentioned about the participatory brainstorming, I will get all that out to you when I send you the follow-up from this. So you'll get all those resources. Thank you, Lori. Yay! Good job. Perfect timing. And now, without further ado, Oscar Perez, who is going to talk to us for another 45 minutes. And do you want me to time you?
5 minutes. I'll put it on.
Are you all right? Remember, in the mic.
Okay. Hello. Buenos días. My name is Oscar Perez Carvajal. My family, my people, they come from the southwestern United States, from the states of New Mexico, Arizona, Chihuahua, and going further back, my grandmother's people on my mom's side were Apache. And on my father's side, my family come from the north of Spain, from a place called Asturias. And the reason I start out this way is because not a single one of us was born in a vacuum. Every single one of us comes from a place and a people. And in the society that we live in nowadays, it is very, very easy for us to have amnesia, cultural amnesia, about where we each individually come from. There's this tendency to look into our history only as far back as maybe our parents, our grandparents, potentially our great-grandparents. In Spanish, there's a saying, si no sabes de dónde vienes, ¿cómo sabes a dónde vas? If you don't know where you're coming from, how do you know where you're going? And I want to start this whole conversation by situating it that way. And I want to ask all of you, just for a really short amount of time, to turn to somebody that's next to you and tell them your full name and where your people come from, so far as you know. So take the next couple of minutes and just turn to somebody and do these things. Okay. Excellent. So now that you've had the opportunity to share with somebody what we say in the traditions that I have been brought up in, is that we've now brought our ancestors into the room. And now we have honored not only where we have come from, but we've started by honoring the sacrifices that were made so that we could be here. A few years ago, let me give you a little background. A few years ago, I started an organization that's called Tending the Fires. And I'm speaking of metaphorical fires, but as you'll see as we move further in, I'm also speaking of physical ones. And those metaphorical fires are those sparks that we all carry within us that come from the people that we come from all the way back. And if we can follow that line all the way back in our minds, in our imagination, then we find that it's all one communal fire. And some of the greatest obstacles that we face in our communities, substance abuse, domestic and intimate partner violence, suicide and suicidal ideation, they all stem from a deep sense of isolation that people in the communities that we serve feel, and that people as individuals feel as well, often in their own households, within their own families. So tending the fires is about becoming aware of the fact that at some point, we're all connected way back. And the things that we think we're suffering in isolation are actually universals. So this goes into informing the work that I do with different communities, starting with that fact that each and every one of us comes from a place that has value, a place that has wisdom, and a place that has a determination for surviving and a resilience just by the mere fact that we're here in this room. The fact that each and every one of us is here means that somebody along the line made incredibly difficult decisions so that that could happen, and got back up over and over and over again in the face of incredible adversity so that we all could be here. So I was trained in cross-cultural anthropology. It's my background. When I was younger, I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, on the US-Mexico border. So I was raised in a Mexican household in an American society. And being that I was raised in two worlds, I got the beautiful experience of the culture of both and the acceptance of neither. And along the way, what really stood out to me was that I knew that there was more to where I came from than just this experience of, on the one hand, having my roots and my culture wiped out. And then on the other hand, the kind of adversity that I saw my family experience as recent immigrants to the United States. And beyond that, the kinds of internalized racism and prejudice that I saw among members of my own community as I grew. And I knew that somewhere further back, there was this wisdom that united all of us. But I had to go into studying from many different cultures to find what those aspects of wisdom were. And then, of course, I had to figure out, how does this fit in and how does this make any sense in the work that we do in the society that we live in? Right? So I went to school for a long time. So what I found in school is that we've developed some incredibly intricate ways of talking about really simple human things. And sometimes those really intricate ways of talking about really simple human things and universal experiences take us further away from what it is to be human than they do actually help us to connect and help each other deal with the kinds of trauma and the kinds of adversity or challenges that we face and that other members of our society face. So I jumped past that last slide. What is trauma? You all have, I'm sure, had so much training around trauma as it's defined, right? And trauma-informed care practices. I'm very big on the use of words in a conscious way, but beyond that, the ways that words fall short. So I love images. So when we look at this image, we have a definition for what trauma is, and you can look at the words, and the words can point to a certain direction, but that direction is also limited. It confines everything that trauma involves. And you can say, well, this is it. And if it doesn't fit this definition, it's not that. But the image behind it is a labyrinth. Because for people that are living with and have experienced trauma, often making sense of what that even is, of why they feel the things that they feel, of where those emotions come from, or where those behavioral patterns come from. It's like trying to make your way through a labyrinth. And oftentimes it's a labyrinth that you're not even aware of being in. Right? And we know that trauma impacts. Who does trauma impact? Everybody, right? Everybody. As we talk about trauma-informed care practices and resilience, I love what Lori said about having to focus on the staff as well, having to focus on ourselves, and knowing that we're all carrying the impacts and effects of trauma, even if it's not something that you can think of having experienced firsthand. Even if it's not something that you can directly connect to, right? An experience in your life. Types of trauma. Okay. Just to review. The one that I really want to discuss here, if I don't go past it, is this last one. So who's read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score? The Body Keeps the Score. No. The Body Keeps the Score is a fascinating book about the way that trauma is embedded in our bodies and the way that we can use physical practices and that field of somatic therapy and of having people engage with their bodies in order to release trauma is growing more and more and more every day. Bessel van der Kolk speaks about something that he calls developmental trauma disorder. And he and a group of psychologists are attempting to get developmental trauma disorder recognized, acknowledged by the medical establishment. But their challenge is that they can't isolate that trauma to a specific incident. That trauma is related to environmental factors in a person's upbringing. And then it stretches beyond that. Right? But it's asking us to look at the way that we live collectively and to expand that scope. And it's something that trauma-informed care is pointing at as well. It's looking to address. It's the idea that in order to really develop healthy communities, we have to start by shifting the entire structure of our society. We have to start by understanding that trauma is something that impacts everybody. And it's interesting why developmental trauma disorder isn't accepted by the medical establishment. Really, it has a lot to do with, at least in what I've read, it has a lot to do with what can and can't be medicated and justifications for what can and can't be medicated. And what we're looking at in shifting our perspectives towards trauma is creating environments where wellness is what we call an emergent property. I'm going to skip past some of these things because too much discussion of, or too much repetition, I should say, of discussing indicators of trauma is also traumatic. Okay. So speaking of developmental trauma disorder, we start to get into looking at the environment as a whole, the environment that a person was raised in. And I work predominantly in Latino, Hispanic, more appropriately, Mexican-American communities, right? And I work with a lot of Native American communities as well. And unfortunately, in many of the communities that I work with, what I see are actual, are young people that are dealing with actual traumatic experiences that they can point to, that they can say, at this age, this happened, right? Or this has continually happened, right, throughout my life. And one of the things that I bring up over and over and over again to them is that we have to look further back than just that experience. We have to look, like I was saying earlier, into who our parents were. What did they go through? Who our grandparents were. What did they go through? And stretching it even beyond that, getting into things like historical trauma. This image right here is a painting by a Mexican painter named José González Camarena. And it's a painting that's called La Fusión de Dos Culturas, the fusion of two cultures. Can you all see it clearly? No? Okay. I can't step out of my bubble, so I'll try and point it out. All right. So what you see in the middle is a horse that's rearing back. And on that horse is a conquistador. Right? He's wearing armor, that is not quite historically correct, but he's wearing armor that is coming from the European context, and jumping up on the horse is what's called an ocelopili or ocelocuautli. They are the Aztec or Mexica warriors of the time when the Spaniards got to Mexico City. So it's the Mexica warrior that is jumping up onto the horse where the conquistador is, dressed in his eagle regalia, right? And he is stabbing the conquistador with the lance, and the conquistador is stabbing him with the sword. And they're piercing each other at the exact same time, right? And this painting, I think, is really interesting because I first came across this painting when I went to Mexico City in 2007. And I was going to all these places where the historical city of Tenochtitlan was in Mexico City, which is where the Spaniards arrived, where the Mexica people were. And in Chapultepec, in the center of it, right, one of the municipal buildings, this painting was there, right in the center of where all of this happened, in one of the big municipal historical buildings. And it's a painting that is about the size of that, maybe half of that wall in the back. It's a huge, huge painting. And having grown up in a Mexican community on the US-Mexico border, one of the things that always struck me was the anger that we carry. The anger that I see in the youth, the anger that I grew up with, and then also this tendency that I saw in people to take that anger out on each other. And when I saw this, it really struck me. And I thought, this is why we're always killing each other. And this is why we're always killing ourselves. Because we all carry this in us. And it's not something that's just isolated to Mexican people or Mexican American people. The interesting thing is that now science is starting to really catch up to some of the things that indigenous cultures have been speaking about for thousands of years in some cases. And we're starting to see more of this discussion about the genetic impacts of trauma. Right? So who has heard or studied anything about epigenetics? Right? And the epigenetic field? No, not very many people. Okay. So epigenetics is an emerging field of genetics that is studying how genetic markers are altered by trauma, by traumatic experiences. And it initially arose out of studying the children of Holocaust survivors. And at this point, there's been multiple generations that have come from Holocaust survivors. And these studies have been able to track how the genetic markers are shifting in people that are direct descendants of people that have experienced massive trauma. But the very interesting thing about it is that those markers can also shift back if the subsequent generations do work around healing those traumas and those wounds. And like I said, I studied cross-cultural anthropology because when I was really young, I had some experience with psychology. And what I found was that most psychologists that I met and that I talked to had like wonderful ways of putting things into these like linear structures and categorizing and putting certain things into boxes, but they didn't understand the cultural context that I was coming from. They didn't understand the language that I spoke. they didn't understand what my understanding was of what my family and what my people had gone through. And that led me into studying how other cultures deal with healing from trauma. And what I found over and over and over again, whether it was working with West African traditions, working with Mesoamerican or North American traditions, was that there was this really strong idea, this really strong belief that if wounding isn't healed in the person that it happens to, that wounding is going to be passed on to their kids. And then their kids are going to incur whatever trauma they incur in their life. And it compounds with what they inherited. And if they're living in a circumstance or situation where they don't know how to deal with that, or there isn't a community container to help them deal with that, then it gets passed down. Right? So the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the people that experienced the initial trauma are now dealing with 3 generations worth of it, plus whatever they go through in their own life. And what's really, really interesting about that is that in many cases, I've worked with young people whose families have done everything possible to provide ideal environments for them. And yet, some of these young people are still bent on their own destruction. And they don't know where the rage that they're carrying comes from. And they don't know why they're so depressed. They don't know why they're so anxious. And I speak to parents, because I lead parenting groups as well. And I speak to parents and they say, well, but I've done everything for my kid. So why is my kid still exhibiting these behaviors or acting out this way? Well, what science is starting to model is some of, it's that side of corroborating these forms of wisdom that have existed in other cultures for quite some time. And I love seeing it personally. I think it's fascinating. And at the same time, I think it gives us the opportunity to start reaching out to and learning from some of these other ways of dealing with, first of all, creating community, and second, in that community, creating containers where people can process the trauma that they carry that was directly related to their life experience, but that was also inherited by them. Okay. Another aspect of this is for the person that's actually experiencing the trauma. And it's the frustration of not knowing, again, where that emotion comes from, where whatever set of emotions that they're dealing with comes from. How many of you have ever asked yourself why you're feeling what you're feeling? Have you ever been in a place of being really, really angry, for example, or just really depressed, and you can't seem to attach that feeling to a current situation in your life? Let's see. How many people? Yeah. Okay. How many of you have worked with people that claim to feel that constantly? How many of you work with teenagers? So one of the key indicators of things like historical and intergenerational trauma is that people that we work with will exhibit the indicators or the symptoms of PTSD, right? But again, not have any direct experience to link it to. Right? So without having that traumatizing event to link it to, that frustration grows in the person, especially when the person is being flooded by images of normalcy and expectations of normalcy that in many cases are not normal. What I see working with communities of young people, of teenagers nowadays, is how many of them want their life to look like what they see on social media. You know? And they want to carefully curate what they're sharing on social media so that it looks like what other people are doing out there. Right? Yeah. And then at the same time, they're dealing with these kinds of things. So what ends up happening is that these great connectors of technology end up further isolating the people that we're working with, right? As opposed to creating community and bringing people together and having people be able to demonstrate to one another the experiences that they have and that they're carrying, right? Because the healing of these things is in their universality. And it's in the communities being able to get together and witness one another in that process of healing these deep-seated emotions that so many people out there are carrying. Okay. Symptoms of intergenerational and historical trauma. All right. Hypervigilance, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, insomnia, alcoholism, and substance abuse. I think suicidal ideation is on here, but I don't want to change the slide, so I'm not going to push the next button. A lot of these things demonstrate as what's just written off as teenage behavior. Right? And we can take that and go even further back. We can look at our educational system and look at the way that children in elementary school are disciplined or are treated as well. And see that often what is seen as misbehavior, disruptive behavior, is really one of or a combination of all these different things. Right? And so again, as we're starting to shift our perspective on what trauma is and how trauma is integrated into our society, we have to shift the way that we look at what it means to be normal and what it means for children to act according to these things that we think they should be acting like, right? And I got to tell you, I'm not so used to the PowerPoint thing. And I'm also not so used to this kind of dynamic. Usually when I lead something, I like for us to be in a group. So in the work that I do and that I found in studying the ways that other cultures deal with trauma, we have, I've found over and over again that there is a collective series of things, or let's say there are 4 collective areas that we need to look at in order to create the kinds of conditions so that people can process trauma and move through it. And I love what Lori said about being a soccer coach and that being part of the healing that she's bringing into the community that she's in, because that's absolutely true. These 4 areas are physical, psychological, emotional, and what I call social or spiritual. Um, the social or spiritual area is very important because it's about the person's sense of belonging and place in some situation or circumstance that's bigger than themselves. And that can just be, I mean, not just, but that can be a social group or a social environment where they know that they're an integral part of it. And for some people, that can extend beyond it into a belief set or belief system that informs everything about who they are and what they are doing in the world. So that's where we get into the spiritual side. When I was asked to come and speak about non-traditional community partners, it was interesting for me because a lot of what I do with communities comes from traditional people. It comes from people who have maintained their traditions, in some cases for thousands of years, right? And in their communities, the most challenging things, the most difficult things that they face is coming from the fact that their traditions have been stripped from them. Right? And so it's interesting to me to look at that, and it's also in a sense challenging to say, okay, here's a model, go take it and use it, because what is going to emerge in each one of your communities is going to be unique to your community. But the important part is being able to look at those 4 different areas and to think about how your agencies are coordinating those 4 different areas and working with people that have experienced some kind of trauma. So healing of trauma requires that 4 elements be addressed in the process, that all 4 of those elements be addressed in the process. The physical element is very important and often overseen. So is the social element. We've been taught in many cases that if we're experiencing something negative, the last thing you're supposed to do is let other people see it. Right? So you isolate. I have a good friend named Francis Weller, who's a psychologist that leads grief rituals for different communities. And he talks about how that tendency to isolate when we are going through something intense, like a period of grief or depression or suicidal ideation, is ultimately what leads people to things like suicide. When they could turn and speak to somebody that they trust, somebody in their community, and share what they're going through, and actually realize that that thing that they think is just theirs, just their burden to carry, is something that is much more common. And they could find the kinds of connections that they need to be able to work through it. Okay, so those 4 areas need to be addressed in healing trauma. There has to be social support and community that is capable of witnessing the healing. And the witnessing piece is very important. Witnessing and being witnessed is very important. Again, this is something that arises in the different traditions that I have spent time studying with, learning with, and in the workshops that I lead for people with communities as well. The next thing is that the person that is suffering from the trauma believes that they can heal. And the last is that that process of healing contribute to the overall well-being of the community. So as I said earlier, I work predominantly with Mexican communities, and my work pulls from a whole wisdom tradition that exists in Mexico. It's pre-Columbian, that's called Toltecayot. And in that, the Toltecayot, there is something that is called La Guerra Florida, or the flowering war. And it's an internal process. And the idea is that everything that we go through in life that causes suffering for us needs to and can be transformed into beauty for the community. And if you think about most works of art that really, really like tug at your heartstrings, most works of art that leave people, with tears in their eyes, whether it's paintings, sculptures, pieces of music, performance, dance, theater, any of that, all of those came out of the process of processing suffering, came out of grieving. So immense beauty, our ability to experience immense beauty and immense joy is only, let me put it this way, is proportionate to our ability to sit with our grief and our sorrow. And both of those things need to be witnessed by a community, in the community. So ultimately, what we're doing, working with these communities, is helping people that have experienced intense trauma transform that trauma from poison to medicine. Lori was talking about people finding their why, the why in what they do, why they do what they do, rather. And in many cases, we'll see people that have started these different kinds of organizations and movements, right, having been the ones that actually directly experience the things that they're working to solve in society. But it's a shift in perspective to think that the people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis can find their sense of purpose through that healing that they're going through, of the trauma that they're experiencing. And another essential part of it is that this process of healing is a lifelong process. It's a no-end path. It's not something that is going to end at a certain point where the person goes back to normal, because there is no going back. There's just moving forward through what we've lived and what we've learned and continuing to grow through that. So I work with immigrant populations, and like I said, I work with Native populations as well. And so some of the things about these populations that I think is important to bring up is that, first of all, when we're talking about immigrant populations, nobody flees a good situation. So the populations that we're working with are people that are coming from adverse situations. And often they arrive here and find themselves in unexpectedly adverse situations, sometimes expectedly, but often unexpectedly adverse situations. And the stories that I've heard over and over and over again the last 15 years that I've been working with immigrant populations reflect this. At the same time, there's this loss of cultural identity and origin, which creates further division in the families. Like I said earlier, I grew up in a Mexican house in an American society. So I had certain expectations at home that conflicted with the expectations outside of the home, and vice versa, which led to more isolation between me and the people in my family. And it's something that happens everywhere, whether it's, like I said, a Mexican population or Hmong population or whatever it may be. That issue of that isolation greatly impacts both parents and their children when they come to our communities. On top of the kinds of tension that we see because of political and social environments. Okay. All right, so non-traditional healing practices. Like I said, it's difficult for me to come and say, well, this is what should be done, because it should all arise out of the community itself. So I broke it down into these 4 parts of what we do in the communities that we work with. So for one, at the top is the physical side. And I included martial arts, yoga, movement practices, sports fit into that as well. But a big part of why I chose martial arts, yoga, and movement practices is because all of these have some aspect of a conscious connection to your body. You're actually feeling into your body in a conscious way as you're learning these different practices. And at the same time, for somebody that's experienced trauma, it's very common for people that have experienced trauma to be completely disconnected from their bodies, to not feel at home in their own bodies. And so through these practices, people begin to reconnect, begin to feel a sense of sovereignty in their own self, which is absolutely important. The next one is nature connection and primitive skills. And this is a field that's growing more and more and more and more. Have any of you heard of forest bathing? No? Forest bathing, it's a Japanese practice that's called Shinrin Yoku. And it's being integrated more and more into healing modalities in the United States. And it is the positive impact of spending time in nature on the body. In Japan, physicians will actually prescribe this to patients. And it's been shown to lower things like blood pressure, anxiety, stress. So this is another integral part of the work that I do with communities, is I have people connect with the place where they live. And that extends the sense of belonging beyond just their social connections. And it also teaches people a certain type of autonomy that is beautiful. It's actually really, it's really powerful to see what this does with young people. I work in collaboration with a school in Nevada City called 4 Elements Earth Education. And we have kids come through from pretty diverse backgrounds, socioeconomically. And to see the way that these kids manage to develop their own sense of resilience and of self-worth and of openness and collaboration is very unique. It's not something that I've seen in any other field. The next thing is cultural restoration. Cultural restoration is what allows us to situate ourselves in time and in place. And what we did earlier on by introducing ourselves to somebody else and by talking briefly about where we come from is the beginning of cultural restoration. But that can be extended even further. And in whatever community you're working in, I really encourage you to ask people their stories of where they come from, of where their families come from. But then beyond that, ask them if they know anything about the stories of their ancestors and their people. We start getting into things like storytelling and myth, which are ways of getting people to universalize their experience through the process of sharing stories that come from the people that they come from, but that are in some cases thousands of years old. And helping people situate themselves in place that way is a very powerful thing as well. Initiation and rites of passage. That's a very long conversation, but it's also a very important one. Helping people identify the different places that they are in their life is critical so that they can also understand what their connection is to their community and what their sense of duty is to their community, what their responsibility is to the community, which in turn increases self-regard and heightens a person's ability to feel that they're an essential part of something that's larger than themselves. And the last thing is community-based ritual. And this can sound really complicated, but it's not. It's actually very simple. And it's something that I've been able to do in high school classrooms in 15 minutes. And the impact that it has on people is beautiful. It's very powerful. But what we're doing is we're taking people outside of the purely rational and cognitive areas of relating to themselves and relating to others. And we're bringing it down into their bodies. And we're allowing them to witness each other and be witnessed through these kinds of practices in ways that really deepen their sense of who they are and their sense of importance in the world. So I think with that, I am going to open it up to questions. Yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Community-based rituals are events that are created by the community itself to address some kind of momentous issue in the community. And the way that I was taught, rituals need to have three things. Rituals need to have grief and the ability for people to express grief. They need to have the ability for people to express gratitude. And the third thing is that they need to have some type of offering or commitment that is made to reconnecting the community as a whole. Right? So right now, this practice of grief rituals is growing. And an example of a very simple one, and it's one that we all might stereotypically know, or we know a variation of this, is a teenager commits suicide. And the members of his school are brought together, and each person is given a cup of water. And that cup of water symbolizes the grief that that person carries. And collectively, each person speaks into that cup of water the grief that they feel for the loss that the whole community experienced, right? Then collectively, they take each of those cups of water out and in silence use that water to water a tree that is then dedicated to the person that committed suicide. It's a symbolic act, but it's a symbolic act that allows everybody in the community to witness each individual's expression of the grief that they're carrying. And at the same time, it feeds something that is going to grow and is going to be a symbol for the continuation of life and for that community. And it's a very simple thing. You can't really put a very easy time limit or cap the time on something like that, for example, because in the process of that symbolic act, people are just going to crack open. And you're going to see people weep in ways that they potentially never have before. Right? But that weeping is releasing the sorrow and the grief that that person carries. And the other people that are witnessing it are also feeling that release. Because many of us were taught never to weep. And sometimes just the act of seeing somebody else do it is very powerful for us. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yes.
So I think there are some things that are happening to all of us in our communities that aren't about a single individual. Without ritual, would you tie that ritual to something that's larger, that's not incidental but conditional?
Absolutely. Okay. So the question, and I didn't repeat the last one, did I? So the question was if you could repeat a ritual or create a ritual like the one that I just spoke of for a condition that is larger than just a single incident. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. It can be a condition in society. The For example, the fire in paradise. You can take a community of people and create a ritual like this so that people in Santa Cruz could express or alleviate that pain that they're carrying or that rage that they're carrying, right, for what happened to another community of people far away, and for the fear that it might happen in their own community. The point is that these symbolic actions are about re-engaging the community as a whole and helping people have a place to put that fear, that sorrow, or whatever it is that they're carrying. Are there any questions over here? Okay.
So a couple of people have asked, how do you manage resistance to these non-traditional rituals or, sorry, let me look at the actual question. Just resistance to non-traditional healing practices, and how do you, maybe in the behavioral health realm, how do you manage that?
Thank you. I manage it by coming in as a cultural consultant and by explaining that these are practices that have been done for much longer than our own system of medicine has existed. And as cultural practices, they're open and they're available. And right now there's this growing need, right, for cultural competency and cultural understanding. And you can find these kinds of rituals or examples of them for just about any ancestral culture that you look into. So that's the way that I deal with that resistance. Resistance on the behalf of the people that are actually participating is very rare. Very, very rare. Any other questions? Yeah.
So two more. One is, how would you suggest creating new rituals, initiations, et cetera, for those who don't know or don't identify with a particular culture? And then another one is, do you suggest that for those of us who don't have a connection to that ritual to actually lead them?
Yeah. Well, that's why these rituals are community based. Because the community decides what the ritual is going to be. Right? And what that symbolic action is going to be. Another thing that I was taught is that there's elements that come into these rituals, and these elements are universal. There's 4 of them. Can you guess what they are? Earth, air, fire, water. Right? And whether they're actually physically present, which they always are. But sometimes, you don't want to have an open flame somewhere. But whether they're physically or symbolically present it's up to the person, to the situation that they're in. So those are universal elements that every single one of the cultures that we all came from had relationships with, that were direct relationships, right? And it doesn't need to mimic another culture, because the beauty of culture is that culture is a constantly growing and evolving thing. It's not a static thing, and so we're actually creating new culture every single moment. By being here in this room, we're creating new culture, and there was another question. I just had to jump on the cultural appropriation one.
What do you suggest about creating new cultures when
Oh,
we don't identify with a particular?
Okay. I say create it. That's what creates your community. That's what shapes your community. And beyond that, about whether a person is capable of leading these, again, it's all in the intention that the person has, and it's all in the heart that the person has, what they're bringing to that situation, that I think is most important. I can provide, and I will provide more resources actually, but there's a couple more that, anyway. So, is that it? Any other questions? I think we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. I know it's it's a weird feeling up here. So we're going to, one thing I just wanted to point out, in your handouts, Oscar put together a list of resources, and then he'll give me additional ones, and I'll send that out after this event is over, usually in about a week. You'll see an email from me. All right, we are now going to have our 10-minute tour of the Rural Information Hub website. Oh, look how nice. Oh, there we go. There it is.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
I'm sorry you can't see me. You'll just have to listen to a disembodied voice for a little bit here. So we are the Rural Health Information Hub, and we have a lot of different resources that are applied to rural health in general. And I'm just going to take you on a quick tour and show you how to find some behavioral health resources on our website. So to begin with, we'll start over here in the online library. This is where the bulk of our information is on our website, and all of these things in our online library are from outside sources. They're from federal sources, state sources, nonprofit organizations, anything that we feel would benefit people who work in rural health. So all of the funding opportunities, the news, the events, and the resources are all kind of categorized in the same way, and they have the same tagging system. So I'm going to show you resources to begin with, and show you how to find behavioral health. So there's a number of different ways that you can go about it, but I always prefer to search by topic, because most of the time you kind of know generally what you're looking for. If you didn't, you could search via a new topic, or by new resources, I should say, or by state. So here we have all of our different tags are alphabetized, and we'll just want to go to behavioral health. And I should say that in our tagging system, behavioral health is an umbrella term, and underneath it is mental health and substance abuse. So if you wanted to look for just substance abuse or just mental health, you could do that. But for now, we're going to just click behavioral health. And I'll see here, I was practicing and it already has my selected categories. But let's go from the beginning here. This is all of the behavioral health resources that we have on the website, and you can, I think there was over 1,000 of them, so you can narrow it. You can narrow it by topic, which just basically means that it would be behavioral health and something else, such as access or violence and abuse. So let's pick child welfare as an example. So there's 12 resources. Let me click OK. So this is nationally. So if you wanted to say behavioral health, child welfare resources in California, for no particular reason, there you go. And there's one. So you can see how you can get from 1,000 to finding one that applies to the thing that you're looking for pretty quickly. So and the resources I should also define are usually things like studies or reports or things that tend to have some sort of substance to them, some sort of data, and we have we have a standard where we don't add it as a resource unless it's something that we feel is going to be apply for a long time or be substantial for, you know, at least 5 years. So over here, let's go take a look at our models and innovations. I want to make sure I get to these points that I think that you guys are really going to benefit from. Just a little bit about our models and innovations. These are actual programs, actual examples that are operating or have operated across the country, and the actual text of these models is written by our web writers, but the programs are outside of us, and we kind of either find them or they are recommended to us either by the programs themselves or by various departments of the government that say, hey, these people have our funding and they're doing a great job, you should take a look at them. So again, you can search for these by topic, by state, and there's also, you can browse by evidence level. Now, most of the time, again, I would say you'd want to browse by topic, but just to show you what evidence level looks like, we have 10 resources, or 10 models, I should say, that are evidence-based, and it goes up from there. So if you're really looking for something specific, it doesn't really work to search by this. But I just wanted to show you because we have a pretty high standard for what we call something that is evidence-based, and so currently we only have 10. So if we browse by topic, again, we can go to behavioral health. And there you see we had 84 sources. Again, it has California. And then when you have them listed here, you can see they're broken down by the amount of evidence that they have. And so there are 84. We have 9 pages of them. So let's narrow it again. We can narrow it by topic. Say American Indians and Alaska Natives and Hawaiian Natives. Narrow it that way. And then we can narrow it again geographically. There you go. So there's one. So again, we have a lot of information, but it's pretty easy to find just the one thing that you're looking for. And a lot of times with models, of course, you probably wouldn't be selecting it for geography because ultimately we're all trying to, bring things to our own state and look at examples from across the country. So that's models and innovation. And let me show you one. We'll click on this one. Oh, and by the way, these are we put these on models that are funded by the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy, which is not just because we are also funded by the Office of Rural Health Policy, but it helps if you are applying for funding from FORHP. You can use one of these examples and say, well, you funded this example, and this is kind of what we were thinking for our project. So when you take a look at one of these, there's usually quite a bit of text, and so it's helpful if you are looking through lots of different models to find one that fits the problem that you are trying to solve. It's good to look at these summaries here, and you can kind of go through and go pretty quickly and see if that is something that fits. Some of them are a little bit little bit longer. Okay. Moving on, I want to show you a way so that you can stay up to date with some of these topics. Up here on our webpage is our updates and alerts section, and there are 3 different ways that you can stay abreast of new things that are happening on our website and new resources that are added and new models and the like. First of which is the RHA Hub this week. That's our weekly email that has the latest article from our Rural Monitor, and it has sort of like the best resources and the best news items just broadly that we had added that week. And so you can subscribe there with your email. But what I think is really cool, especially if you're looking for something very specific, is our daily and weekly custom alerts. So here it allows you to put your email in, and you can choose between daily or weekly, and you can choose the type of thing that you want sent to your inbox. If you want the latest news on a particular issue, or resources, or models, or funding, or events, if you're looking for anything of those specifically, or you can just leave them all selected. And then here, this gives you kind of a pretty literal outline of our tagging system. So you can go through and click all the things that you are interested in, and you will be emailed a list of those things as soon as they are added to the website. So that's pretty cool if you're somebody who wants the latest thing right away. And of course you can choose between daily or weekly. So if you don't want daily emails, you don't want to be bombarded by them, that's an option too. So how am I doing on time here? I will show you, if you go to our contact us page, this is basically, if you ever have any question about really anything, whether it's a specific something specific to our website, or just have a question about rural health in general, and you don't know who to talk to, or you don't know what the proper procedure is for getting something started, you can give us a call and or send us an email, and we will either answer the question if we can, or we will find somebody who can answer the question for you. So I think I'm probably at my time. If there are any questions, I'd be willing to answer them. If you have like specific questions that I would have to look up, feel free to give us a call or send us an email.
And I can attest to the fact that they're very responsive. They got right back to me when I emailed them. Any questions for Matt in the room or online or at any of our hubs? Going. Well, thank you, Matt, for coming to us from blizzardy North Dakota.
Yeah, no problem.
We had snow here in California. I had 4 feet at my house. I just want to share. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I know.
I mean, it's fine when it's on the ground. It's something else when it's in your eyes and
exactly.
In your face.
You're trying to drive in it. Exactly. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yep, no problem. Thank you for having me.
All right. So this is a really great resource. And again, I welcome you to go through, take a look. If there's any area that you would like me to try to investigate and see if I could bring in someone, I'm hoping for, in the save the date for the May, I have made initial contact with somebody from Texas, and they have a model behavioral health program that's via television. I know that we do that in a lot of our communities. We do it in South Lake Tahoe, but their program is kind of the next step where they actually have grief groups online. And again, everything focused in on the rural community and trying to remove that isolation and bring people closer together so that even when people are far apart, like we are in this gigantic region that we live in, you can actually bring people together. But there are many, many other ones. I know that some counties are involved now in the CalWorks home visiting grant. So there's a home visiting model that integrates in domestic violence screening. So there's all sorts of really cool stuff. So I invite you to do that. All right, now we get to the fun part. Oh, first of all, we did put out some more food and some fresh coffee. We have some dips and chips. So if you need a little bit of extra food, feel free to go out. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to get the food, and please bring food back to your office so I don't have to take it home, because we're trying not to eat so much food at my house. So I have two questions for you. The first question we're going to spend about 15 minutes on. And this one, taking all this information that I know is in your brains, that you heard from Lori, that you heard from Oscar, what are some key components of a trauma-informed behavioral health system that you would want to see in your community? So just sitting at your table, or maybe even like you're just 2 or 3 folks at your table, maybe you could turn around and join the table behind you. And at the remote sites as well, just think about key components of a trauma-informed behavioral health system. We're going to have 15 minutes, and I forgot to put paper out on your tables, so I'm going to do that now. If somebody would scribe for you, each table. Okay, I know you're having great discussions. We're going to move on to the second question. Make sure somebody wrote down like one or two things that you'd like to report out. And the second question is, how can we engage non-traditional partners in our collaborations? And what I would love, if anyone has successful strategies that they have already utilized in their county. I think Alpine County may have a successful strategy that they've used with the Native American population. But if you have a successful strategy that you could share with the group, that would be great. So we're going to do 15 minutes on this question, and then we'll report out very briefly, and then we'll evaluate and move on down the road. So 15 minutes on this question. And don't forget to have somebody scribe. Thank you. 4 minutes, and then we're going to do a quick report out. 4-minute warning. We're going to come back together for our report out. So I think we're going to start with one of our remote sites. Serena, we're going to unmute you if you're willing to talk to us. Are you all alone there, Serena? Poor thing.
Yes, my participant had to leave, and a couple folks who had signed up didn't show, so it must be one of those days.
All right, well, thank you for sticking with us. Excuse me, just speak up a little because we have a little, our speakers are small and our room is
Okay,
large. So let us know a couple of things that maybe you would like to report out to the group.
great. Does this volume sound good?
Yes, can you hear in the back? Okay, yes, perfect.
Great. I had a local nurse practitioner with me who's at the pediatrician's clinic, and they have recently opened a clinic at the high school here locally. So she spoke to wanting to see some more youth involvement, especially for adolescent boys. One issue she sees around sports, it's like back to what Oscar said, it's a positive association, physical activity, but through drug testing, the youth who often are at risk, need it most, aren't on the sports teams. So how can you work around that? In my work with First Five, I see a need for postpartum support for new mamas through the women's health clinic and the pediatrician clinic. There's often postpartum screenings, but where do they go from there? A need for more resources. And then successful strategies to share. We highlighted our local resilience group for Inyo County, led by Jody Vinker, has brought a lot of non-traditional partners to the table, Wild Iris, Native American clinics, things like that. And then here with First Five, we've brought Triple P positive parenting to our community. So we've trained a lot of staff and partners in Triple P, and then are also offering it to our families to increase family resiliency as a major initiative of First Five. So those are some of the successes we've seen here locally in Inyo. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Serena. Do we have anybody in Alpine? Janelle, or do you have anything you want to report to the group? I think you're self-muted. Oh, you know what, Janelle? You don't have, that's okay. You didn't enter a PIN number, so we can't unmute you. She's poor thing. You can chat in if you want. If not, so I'm sorry. That's why they have that audio pin. Lo siento. And then did Tammy leave us? Oh, she's disconnected. You can call back in if you want. Tammy may have left. Okay, no worries. No worries. Let us know. Chat in if you get reconnected and you want to report something back, and we'll try to unmute you then. Okay, group here, but you need to talk into the mic. Sorry, you know this. So we're going to start over here. Donna, do you want to be the?
Okay. So are you asking about non-traditional type strategies? Is question number 2 that we're talking about, or? Okay. Well, so for one, we would like to incorporate more non-traditional and cross-cultural approaches to a trauma-informed community. We were talking about in relations to sports, because this is a very big sports community. And Lori was sharing, what is the coaching philosophy, which I really liked. Sports is an opportunity to learn decision making and be, teaching the kids to be willing to accept the consequences. And the parents, hello. And then we need more mentoring opportunities. We definitely need more mentoring opportunities. And then also, what about our own staffs? We really need to kind of look at how do we tie in our own staffs to trauma-informed care, that type of thing. And then on 2, we talked about, we do have some non-traditional collaborations. Sierra Wind, they go around and do the labyrinth, which I think is super important. California Tribal TANF, they have all-inclusive community trainings and meetings. We talked about community events that we have, such like Band Against Cancer, where things that affect everybody. Cancer affects everybody, everything, and it gives us opportunities to mourn and celebrate together, that type of thing. But one of the challenges is always kind of the lack of funding to consider, which is why we have to not only think about non-traditional partners, but non-traditional ways of addressing that.
So I just wanted to mention on the sports, and I don't have the name of the organization in front of me, in front of my brain, in the old gray matter. But there is a group. I remember I went to an ACES convention a while ago, and I can't remember. Do you remember, Lori? I'm going to put it in I'll find it. But they actually are, their focus is training coaches to be trauma informed. It's the coolest organization, and I can't remember. It's very, yeah, maybe positive coaching. Yeah. They're up in, up in Seattle, but I will find it and put it in the resources. Okay, who wants to go next? Oh, I just heard.
This is all written down, so you don't need to. Oh, I have to read it. Yeah. Okay. Question number 1 was need communication during crisis intervention is lacking. This approach is not being utilized, especially with a quote old school unquote mentality. Needs somebody to actually do it. Everybody thinks it's a great idea, but you got to get somebody to do it. Talk, do not ignore. Things need to be discussed, and too much medication at trauma. Direction has to come from the top down. Kids need to dream. They need to be able to talk about it. Regarding question number 2, need to bring in speakers to workshops to explain the connecting. Connect with nature-based partners, for example, sweat lodge communities. Restructure programs that take into account non-traditional methods, and more people need to go through this training, and yoga in schools. Let's do it. How about it with the workplace too? Oh, sweat lodge.
I think going back to your comment about staff as well over here, I think something that we talk about a lot in training is that we all have a sphere of influence. The person who answers the phone, the custodian, the bus drivers, everybody has a sphere of influence. And so how do we encourage staff to use their sphere of influence, even if they're not it doesn't have, you don't have to wait until your executive director tells you to do something. You can start improving your own practice.
Kids sometimes have more opportunities to talk to the bus drivers and the custodians than they have opportunity to talk to anyone else.
Yeah. So giving people that power to use their sphere of influence wherever they happen to be in the organization, I think is really important. Anybody over here?
We didn't write everything down. And can you remind me what the first question was? Because I mushed it all together. Okay, in the system. So I'm not sure, please everybody chime in with what I didn't write down. So one that was pretty universal among the group was about training being of high importance, training, and kind of like the others have said, training among staff, recognizing the responsibilities and the positions each staff member within an organization has, whether you're frontline or executive, and finding ways to bring that training meaningful to them. That not all players are at the table. That was talked about quite a bit here. A lot of the people that we would like to see who can initiate or sustain system changes are not here, but we're all here and we all kind of know each other, and we're the ones that are, here usually. So trying to find a way for that to happen. And then also for system changes is to maybe bring in business approaches, because again, one thing that was talked about here is what's in it for me. That's the bottom line for us as workers, but all the way up. So maybe using a business approach and speaking that language so that what we know works or is needed can be said in a way or presented in a way that people who make the decisions and manage money would see that there is a buy-in to it. So also from the bottom up, rather than expecting those leaders with money and power to find that issue and want to work down to find us as the workers. And then also maybe just ways to package the information, how to present it so that it is, and use every method possible of what might catch someone's attention or again, be something that they could relate to. And then maybe doing that, underneath that would be we talked about involving the schools and kids in projects, and again, having that as a demonstration and the voice of how you present that information to other decision makers. And then possibly bringing in college students who could also do some of that packaging and use it as a project to, to be able to go around to some of those other areas and share the information. And then for non-traditional partners, we talked about, non-traditional. One of the things that to consider is all the different cultures we have. We're a rural community, and so there are a lot of other cultures besides the traditional culture. So here we have a huge agricultural culture, and that covers a lot of area. But we're all part of the community too. So trying to define those two, that we are a community, we have many cultures in that community. Some of them might be non-traditional kinds of cultures too. And then how to bring those together, because everything we're talking about today and what our table talked about, everything, mental health, trauma-informed care, substance abuse, mental issues, suicide, all of those things affect every one of those people in the community that is a part of one of those other cultures. That's all, I think.
I'll just grab that one because once again, I have a couple of things I just want to add. So one thing I want to put in a plug for, if you haven't already joined on the ACES Connection website, and you just Google ACES Connection, we have a another one. We have a Sierra community. And it's a great place to, if you join, you can set, just like with that rural information hub, you can set alerts so that you learn, like that's where I learned about Dr. Nadine Harris being appointed as the Surgeon General of California. Client came to me in the morning. But again, as we live in these rural areas and we are isolated, it is a way to keep ourselves more in touch. So I would encourage you to look to that, to join that. We're trying to create a regional community, and that's just one way to do that. Okay, last. No, we got, yes, please.
Just springing off those comments, you asked a lot of really great questions, and where you started was, or where I started my listening, we're here and we know each other, right? So there's some amount of acquaintance that you have. Some of you probably know each other really well. Many of you may know your situations, but not each other really well. But I mean, this is really, what I was hearing are lots of suggestions for a learning community and answering some of those. How do we make a movement? Really, can we make a grassroots movement? Can we create some common practices amongst ourselves in this learning community? And, it kind of require, first of all, finding out how many of you are interested in doing that together. And then seeing if there's a possibility for that kind of move, and then coming together as Barb convenes you all to start building some of that practice together and focusing on resources and, cross-pollinating ideas and all of that. I mean, I just heard a really great kind of menu or possibility for upcoming learning communities for your next fiscal year. if it's something that you're all interested in exploring. So thank you for those great questions.
Oh, one more.
It's not hard. Just read your thing.
Yeah. Okay. What was question one? Referring to question one was being aware of our own judgments and biases in working with our community. So being self-aware, I think, is really important. Was this for question two? Is that for number one? A parenting curriculum for teaching parents to build resilience in their children. And the other ones I can't see. Oh, reaching out to the tribes in our area, schools and high schools, both high schools and middle schools. I think mostly creating those connections with anybody who's maybe a non-traditional partner. So taking that initiative, I think, is what that meant, and reaching out to them, how can we all work together, and right?
We talked a lot. We didn't write everything down.
I was thinking
Thank you.
I just wanted to echo one of the things that Lori said that I really loved about I haven't done it yet. So a lot of these things, these are things that we haven't done yet, but now we can think about them, and just being aware makes us more apt to reach out and think about those other populations and people. So we haven't invited folks yet, but that's going to be our next step. And never be afraid to invite people to a learning community. I nag everyone here with my emails where I share with you, the flyer, and I say, pass it on freely. Please pass it on to some of these non-traditional partners so we can build this community as well. Same thing with my folks. I didn't put my report out on. Same thing with my folks in remotely. And I think that's all. That's it for the day, right? So thank you guys so much. You're always such a wonderful group. Please eat more food. Do your evaluation. And thank you so much for traveling here. And thank you, Lori and Oscar. Yay, they were so great. Another Carrie Shane production.